On COVID-19 and the power sector. COVID-19 is a new phrase we've all got to know about. This afternoon, our focus will be on the macroeconomic issues, consumer purchasing power, and cost-reflective tariffs as a result of the challenges resulting from COVID-19 and the economic impact it had on us as a country and the rest of the world. Nigeria, as you well know, is not isolated from the challenges that are happening. So you're welcome to this very interesting and intellectually stimulating discussion. This session is being recorded, so I encourage you to switch off your mobile phone, particularly for the panelists and the moderator and all the other guys, ladies and gentlemen, who are joining us. You will have opportunity to ask your questions. If you look at your Q&A session on your laptop or on your handheld device, there will be opportunity for you to ask questions. Those questions will be compiled by the moderator who will ask our panelists. Jide Adeola, a partner in PwC Lagos, will be the moderator for today, and he will take on from me now to tell us what the session will be. We intend to run this session for about an hour and a half. It's going to be quite interesting, so I do encourage you to pay close attention. And once again, thank you for joining as we, as usual, begin to engage on issues that will move our nation forward at the time like this. Thank you and welcome. Jide, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pedro Montueme, Energy Leader, PwC. It's a great privilege for us to have all our attendees and participants as well as our panelists today, and it promises to be insightful. Today we'll be talking about macroeconomics, consumer purchasing power, and cost-reflecting tariffs. But just to take us further in this session, I would like to call on one of my fellow colleagues. His name is Mr. Abimbola Banjo, a director in our management consulting group and a power sector participant. He's been working in the power sector for quite some time. He will be covering the basic macroeconomics in the sector, the impact on the power sector, and our thoughts going forward in terms of how the industry will move forward. I will now hand over to Mr. Abimbola Banjo to take us forward in this webinar. Over to you, Banjo.
Thank you, Jide. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're all keeping safe. Thank you for attending this power sector event. Over the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'll be taking you through some of the key facts that will be useful and relevant for this conversation. The unemployment rate in Nigeria currently sits at about 23.1%, making it one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. Last year, in 2019, it was projected that the unemployment rate will sit somewhere around 33.5% in 2020. But that excludes underemployment as well as the impact of COVID. And to paint a picture of what the impact of COVID means, the US of A witnessed a jump of 11% in unemployment, with about 26 million people unemployed in the United States. Also, the purchasing power of consumers continues to decrease, as normally in Nigeria, about 55% of household income is spent on food and beverages, leaving only about 45% for other essentials like housing, transport, security, and the likes. To put it in context, the minimum wage in Nigeria is about 30,000 naira, as compared to other countries like the UK, where the minimum wage for the same period is about 640,000 naira. There's also a reduction in the government's revenue, as the price of crude oil has dropped from $57 per barrel in January to about $15 a barrel as of yesterday. Of course, this has a big impact on government inflows, as 90% of Nigeria's export proceeds is from crude oil. And that led the Minister of of Finance and Budget and National Planning to cut non-essential spending by about 1.5 trillion naira. There's also a reduction in economic activities, as in Nigeria there has been disruptions to supply chains across the country due to the lockdown. There has been border closures to non-essential trade, and of course there has been limited markets for exports due to the impact of the pandemic. I was looking at the news this morning, and two headlines struck me. The first one was a global bank whose profits have fallen sharply as coronavirus impacts on its borrowers. And the other one was an airline that is planning to cut its workforce by about 10% and reduce production. The Nigerian power sector is not immune to the global effect of COVID. And of the current power load of about circa 3,500 megawatts, 64% of that goes to residential customers. And COVID has led to a lockdown, which means that there's reduced demand for power by both the industrial and commercial customers, which together make up the bulk of the MD customers. This obviously distorts the cross-subsidy qualities of the tariff and reduces the cash flows to the distribution company. Cost-reflective tariffs have been a big conversation for a while. And the NEC had planned by December 2019 tariff adjustments and minimum remittance order for the year 2020 sanctioned a minor review of the electricity tariff to commence by 1st April 2020. But next order, also in March 2020, effectively postponed the takeoff of the minor review of the tariff. At Q3 2019, total remittances in the sector was about 33%, falling short of the 44% expected by the regulators. And these remittances are funds available for settlement higher up the value chain, including things like power purchase, things like gas supply and transmission infrastructure. Metering is a critical aspect of the sector. It ensures there's a lot of integrity in the way bills are pushed to customers or to end users. The customers in the sector had complained about availability and pushed the regulators to come up with a cap on estimated billing. But prior to this, the regulators had released the MAP regulation of 2018, which was basically to drive accelerated metering to close out the current metering gap. Unfortunately, the current COVID situation has significantly impacted the rollout of meters due to issues like availability of FX and FX devaluation, issues around slower demand for meters and production of meters due to the lockdown, and in part due to the port congestions. The current metering gap sits at about 5.8 million unmetered customers. The average energy losses sits currently at about 44% rather than the 26% expected by the regulators. Largely, this is due to customers' behaviors in areas around energy theft and unwillingness to pay, estimated billing, and low metering, affordability issues like the ones we talked about earlier, and a deficient transmission and distribution network. It's very important that the discos actually take their performance improvement plans rather seriously. To help, the government has looked at a number of interventions. So which in 2014, 213 billion was made available via the NEMS fund. followed by in 2017, where the Power Assurance Guarantee Fund was made available, and by extension, in 2019, another 600 billion was made available as an extension of the Power Assurance Guarantee Fund, all to sort out the financial challenges in the power sector. In the past 5 years, the federal government has spent about 2.3 trillion naira in downstream petroleum subsidies. The tariff shortfall in the electricity sector is about 1.6 trillion naira. Together, energy subsidies alone amount to about 3.9 trillion naira, which represents about 31% of the current foreign reserves and 37% of Nigeria's 2020 budget. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Jide, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abimbola Banjo, Director of PwC, for the excellent presentation of facts. It was very useful in leading the conversations in our panel session. I will now proceed to welcome our panelists, and I would like to start with the distinguished lady on our panel today. I'll be having 5 panelists, and you give me just this brief moment to introduce every one of them and read out their profile. So I'll start with Mrs. Funke Oshibodu. Mrs. Funke Oshibodu is a well-accomplished professional with multi-sectoral experience. Mrs. Oshibodu was CEO EcoBank Nigeria Limited, or PLC, and EcoBank and Union Bank PLC. She is currently the Managing Director of Benin Electricity Distribution Company. She was once named by Financial Times of London as one of the world's 50 leading businesswomen in recognition of her strides in Nigeria's corporate world. Mrs. Oshibodu is an alumnus of the University of Ife and the Harvard Business School. Please join me and welcome Mrs. Oshibodu. Next on my panel is Dr. George Oluwande. Dr. Oluwande has served in many roles, including Senior Advisor to the Minister of Power in Nigeria. He was once COO of KEPCO Energy Resources Limited. He was also formerly CEO Sahara Power Group. He is currently the Managing Consultant of Abisol Consultants Limited. Mr. Dr. George Oluwande obtained a BSc Hons in Electrical Engineering from the University of Lagos in 1983, an MSc in Systems and Control, and also a PhD in Control from UMIST in the UK in 1985 and 1988, respectively. He is a chartered engineer and a member of IEE and IEEE. He is also a member of IFA Technical Committee on Power Plants and Power Systems. Dr. George, you are welcome to this panel. Third on my panel today is Mr. Ayo Epo. Mr. Ayo was called to the Nigerian bar on the 22nd of October 1987. He is an alumnus of UNICAL 1986, UNILAG 1991, and King's College London in 2018. He has had various degrees that are focused on oil and gas from all these institutions. He is the founding partner in the law union firm. He moved on from there to join public service in 2001. He led the power sector reform team, PSRT, who worked for the BPE. He was a former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice for Cross River State. He was also a special advisor in Cross River State and was former commissioner. And he was also at the NERC, the Commissioner for Market Competition Rates in the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. He led General Electric Corporation, and then he also returned afterwards to politics, where he contested as the governor of Cross River State under the auspices of the SDP. He is a director in a couple of companies that are focused on energy infrastructure developments, real estate, and consulting. Ayo is a thought leader in infrastructure policy, law, regulation, and project finance in Nigeria. He is an avid golfer and a motorcyclist. Mr. Ayo, you are welcome. One of my panelists is Mr. Ebi Ferry Clark. Mr. Ebi Ferry Clark has a master's degree in engineering from Cambridge University, England. He started his career as an investment banker. He's also worked in the capital markets before moving into consultancy. He was a foundation member of the Presidential Task Force for delivering the Nigerian power sector reform and privatization. He is currently the Special Advisor Assistant Energy to the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. My fifth panelist today is Mr. Ahmad. He's an expert in infrastructure finance with focus on power. Ahmad is well accomplished and has held multiple executive roles in the past 15 years, including working in GE as the Chief Operating Officer. Also, he was the operations leader, onshore subsurface unit at GE Oil and Gas Unit in Houston up to 2015. Ahmad is the special advisor to the President on Infrastructure. Ahmad also participates in the Vice President's Industrial Council as part of the Power Subcommittee from 2017 to 2019. He's an alumnus of the New York State University of Economics at Buffalo. Mr. Ahmad Zachary, you are welcome. Thank you very much for joining our panel today. The power sector, as you've heard from Mr. Banjo Abimbola, is not immune to COVID-19's impact. There has been a reduction in consumption and the potential for industrial consumers to take on a lot of power. Tariff increases have been suspended. Metering plants have been impacted. The metering gap continues to rise. There are solvency challenges as a result of low remittances. There's a government bailout that has been talked about up to even 2019. The unemployment rate in Nigeria is extremely high. Decreased purchasing power, lower government revenues, reduced economic activity, energy losses up, and all of those things are at play today. So we'd like to get your opening thoughts, my distinguished panelists today, and I would like to start with the distinguished lady amongst you all, Mrs. Funke Oshibodu, to make our opening remarks. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much, Mrs. Oshibodu.
Thank you, Jide. I'd like to start with highlighting a few things that is obvious. COVID-19 definitely adversely affected our customers. Everybody believes that earning power has been practically everybody. That has a high amount of people that are dealing with tenants have also had taxes. On the other hand, companies, commercial and industrial customers have increased their consumption, whether to this order. In addition, we have a situation where residential customers, more power is diverted to them, especially have commercial and consumer and industrial customers. So residential customers across the country have more power currently. Cost reflective tariff is the issue, in the sense that the tariff used is not cost reflective, and we're talking about tariff level of gas, all the heat generation, transmission, distribution, and generally this becomes that companies cannot really recover their costs. In addition to that, COVID has in some way impacted cost of the electricity. Cost has gone up river, and since COVID setting, and in addition, revenue has gone down about 50% for the whole sector. Having said that, there are other disruptions that have taken place. Materials supply affected, with materials coming from different areas, largely because and sellers of these materials. Operational complexities and cost of operation higher. There's been major increase in foreign exchange rates, and this business has a significant cost of foreign exchange. Having said that, the distribution companies have rearranged the operation. The commercial operation has become contactless. Most of us are doing what we call telemarketing, using technology, calling customers, The payment system also is contactless. Customers are paying various channels. Distribution of using of meters. Various apps are being developed by different distributions. Developed apps where customers can actually read their meters and send to us themselves. And then we're distributing those also using other channels, basically using texts, WhatsApp, and other things, and email. So from a physical perspective, there's less physical contact, almost to zero. The main physical activity still on the technical side, where you still have to physically move around to sort it out. Either will help the medium term sorting that out, but at this time, that aspect we still have to move around to etc. Prepaid meeting is going on very slow, very, very slowly. The process, partly because map size, cost of operation is higher, price of charge is not price reflective or cost reflective. It's shown duty payment went up by 30% to 50%. And customers also are not yet seeing in as fast as they should. But in reality, this is the future. This is something that everyone. So, just to conclude with suggestions in terms of how to sort out energy consumption, we see that about 30% of it is about wasted. The more the customers now clean energy saving methodology, the faster they are. That's why party-wise is fast. The government also needs to pay bill. There's a amount of that outstanding. It would be useful if tax price is fixed and fixed from the perspective of Naira rather than exchange and government are in a position to absorb. Central bank look at moratorium maybe about 12 months for various facilities to scheme, and there's a need to reduce 30% in cost. Finally, customers need to start this business as a business that requires everybody to key into the fact that it's not power. Regulator needs to suspend some of what he has done in minimum remittance, changing the system, the mapping process. They also need to consider how they will rearrange the whole system on a policy and regulation, taking into consideration what has happened with COVID. Having said that, the latest proposal from the regulators about activation of differentiated energy consumption tariff, the welcome one, was it will assist in changing the way we bill customers and see supply based on happen. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Oshibodu. Thank you. You talked about technology, less physical contact, energy consumption, savings, government impact, moratorium on loans, regulator to suspend some of the things that's doing and negotiated bidding. Thank you very much. I would like to move to my next Dr. John Oluwande. You've heard what Mrs. Oshibodu said. I want you to also, what are your opening remarks regarding the power sector? What should we be doing?
Thank you very much. Hello all, and thanks to PwC for organizing and inviting me to be a panelist at this event. My opening remarks are some observations on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the major stakeholders in terms of the Nigerian electricity supply industry, namely the customers and suppliers, for example, the Gencos and Discos. In terms of consumers, large energy consumers, for example, the industrial users and commercial users, that have been hard hit by the lockdowns, especially in Lagos and Ogun State, as this would have impacted on staff, production, as well as sales, which would be down. Conversely, the residential consumers would have seen an increase in availability of power as a consequence, given that they will take up the slack in the uptake to the industrial and commercial customers. There are anecdotes like from my own brother in Ibadan who talks about increase in reliability of supply to his house. In terms of the generating companies, the GENCOs, operationally, their capacity and capability would not have been impacted significantly, and daily generation statistics have not been that different during this pandemic. However, this will not be the case for the distribution companies, the DISCOs, that have significant levels of industrial and commercial users, such as those DISCOs serving Lagos, Ogun, Abuja, and even Kano State. For such DISCOs, the impact of COVID-19 would be to see a significant reduction in income as a result. Also, collection activities will be impacted. So overall for DISCOs, revenues would have adversely been impacted, and in some cases over 50% reduction in income. Therefore, this will affect the whole of the value chain in terms of revenue and payment. PCN, embed, the generation companies, gas suppliers, and so on. However, there are some key lessons and opportunities that stem from the impact of the pandemic. For example, at the DISCOs, there is need for more data analytics. That is, looking at data and trying to make sense of them. Need for more automation. Installation of smart meters, although the benefit of this is less to do with collections if consumers can't pay, or at least it's in terms of accessibility of the customers. For generation companies, it is the fact that this pandemic will be a wake-up call for some of the GENCOs who have been trying to move away from the provision of staff accommodation for plant staff on site, as proximity of staff to plant is now going to be seen as a positive thing. There is also an opportunity now for more homegrown research and development. The need to start looking at adaptive technology in the context of the Nigerian environment. I throw this out there, not necessarily as a brilliant idea. For example, in the rural areas, it is arguable that the greatest need for power is during the evenings and nighttime. Solar energy is deployed during the day. Normally, batteries are what is used for storage, but can we start looking in the context of the fact that there are symbiotic needs? They need water. Can we have systems that use solar during the day, get water pumped, turn it into water storage, and then do what is called pump storage in reverse for night generation? This is something that we should be looking at, enabling technology within the local context. I think I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Yeah, all of that. Thank you very much. I want to move on to my third panelist, Mr. Ayo Ego. Thank you very much for coming on board today. I know you've been at the forefront of governance in the power sector, so we want to hear your perspective as you make your opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Julia, and thank you to all the listeners who have joined. Thank you to PwC for setting this up and for inviting not just myself, but all the other distinguished panelists to speak. Looking at the sector, let me start by just putting out a few things which I think are facts that we can't avoid. Before COVID-19 became the talk of the entire globe, the power sector in Nigeria already had issues it needed to contend with and to deal with. And those issues have not been taken off the table just because COVID is here. So that's point one. Point two is that it really, even if it were before, it really can no longer be business as usual for all stakeholders in the market. We really have to put on our thinking caps and work out just how we can move things forward. Not just the issues we had before, but the ones that COVID-19, some of which George and Ms. Oshibodu have put out there. The third is the way the power sector works in Nigeria is largely along the line, determined by macroeconomics, interest rates, exchange rates, inflation rates, and all that. But there are other big issues that we must contend with now, and paramount amongst those are what the customer itself wants. We really have not asked ourselves and focused previously to now on what our customers actually want. And so that is also going to be a big factor in how the economics of the market play out. The fourth issue for me is how do we then, in the light of all these things which we are going to, some of them we'll talk about today, but which have also been said, get our market really going? I think that in that regard, we must ask ourselves, what market are we talking about? Is it the 4,000 megawatt a day market, which is what I guess we're all focused on? Or is it the alternative market that actually provides a lot of the electrical energy that Nigerians consume? The generators, off-grid solutions, solar to home solutions, and that sort of thing. Is that really the market that we should be talking about? I think that we need to begin to look at that market also, because it is actually significantly larger, more critical to the economy than the 4,000 megawatt a day market that we all have our attention focused on, the distribution companies, our generating companies, the transmission company of Nigeria. That to me is actually not the market to talk about. It's a competitor to the main market, which is the alternative power market that is driven by our generators and the diesel market that supplies it. So we need to ask ourselves, where is the market and how do we address that market? The critical thing there is to bring those two together. If we're going to, anyway, I'll talk about that presently. Then our informal sector is really what has been most hit by COVID. Those who are staying at home, those who need support, are largely those who play in the informal sector. And they do form the bulk, not only of our numbers in terms of population, but also in terms of our workforce. And if we're going to get our economy, keep our economy going, or even, just ensure that we are able to survive, we must find a way to deal with that. Final point on this, which the point which I'd like us to bear in mind as we carry through this discussion, is that NERC's primary responsibility, that's the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, is about, first and foremost, statutorily, under the Act setting it up, is about markets, creating markets and making sure that those markets work as efficiently as possible. So for me, the critical governance issue therefore has to hover around how do we ensure that we have a full-scale, united, joined up electricity market in which all the players in that market are actually working for each other and therefore are delivering to the customer, which ultimately is what we are focused on. So with those in mind, I would say that the things that we need to look at now are also the things which were already front and center before COVID came about. Because really, if you think about it, we don't have an electricity market in the country. Why do I say this? We put in energy into that market, and I'm talking now about the 4,000 megawatt market. We put in energy into that market, and we don't get enough money out of it. And because we don't get enough money out of it, that market really has not grown, and it's not likely to grow until we change that equation. So for me, the three things which are most critical at the moment are to take ourselves back to that period of time, and there was such a time actually, post-privatization, when you had the beginning of that symbiotic relationship between energy that goes into the market and money flowing in the opposite direction. We need to go back to that. And at that time, we had rules working, we had governance mechanisms working, we had contracts that were actually beginning to work. We never really gave it that much time to carry us through to the point where we are today. So we need to ask ourselves, what worked a few years ago, and how do we get back to making those things work again? That's point number one. Point number two is around the question of money. There is quite a bit of money in the Nigerian market. And for those in the financial services industry, they'll tell you that we're not just talking about the banking sector, but also our pension funds. But our pension funds up till now have not engaged with the power sector. Obvious reasons. We can't nationalize the pension industry. We can't compel money to go where it doesn't want to go to. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do in terms of capitalizing the industry to attract the kind of money that is already sitting down, desperately looking for where to go to within Nigeria? Until we can put those structures around a proper market, we're not going to get that much of money coming in from outside into our power sector, much as we might need it. And the third is something that really connects with the first two things I talked about, which is a market that works, market rules that work, contracts that work, regulation that works, alongside the need to recapitalize the market, but also the third one, which is governance, which I guess is the big thing that we're talking about here. But governance here also speaks to two things. Governance on the public sector side, which is policy making and regulation working together, but also governance on the private sector side, which we tend to think is focused more on the distribution companies, but I don't really think so. Much as we'd like our distribution companies to be governed better, to work better, we also need to look at other market participants, and here I will refer to the bulk electricity trading company, MBET, and the Transmission Company of Nigeria. So it's not just how the discos are governed and how they are run, and the need to upgrade and improve the quality of governance in the distribution company across the board, but also how is our transmission company governed? Why do we still have a situation where we have TCN taking responsibility for market operations and system operations? By now, 6-7 years after privatization, we should be looking at separating the construction function that is TCN's primary responsibility from the market operation and system operation function that is at the bedrock of managing the movement of electrons as opposed to cash. Same thing with MBET. Now, so at top level, this is the picture that I'd like us to look at from a governance standpoint. How do we ensure that those three things, capitalization, a market that works according to agreed certain definitive rules, and also dealing with our governance on both the public and the private sector side, how they all come together. So that's really what I would say by way of introductory remarks. Thank you very much, Judy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayuepo. Thank you for letting us know that we need to rethink the governance, quality of governance, ensuring there are right relationships, and that we visit the value chain, that all the elements of the value chain are working together to serve the customers. Thank you very much. I now move on to Mr. Ebi Ferre-Clark. Thank you once again for joining. You've been working with CBN in a lot of ways to try to make the power sector work. So I just wanted to hear from you. What are your opening remarks with respect to the topic that we are discussing today?
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
No, first of all, I'd like to say that this is a once-in-a-century event. And there has been in our lifetimes, no sort of equivalent event that has happened like this. That has tended to mean that we think that there needs to be some sort of extraordinary response to it. And that may be true, but as was alluded to previously, pre-COVID, there were problems in the power sector to start off with. And the real question about proposing extraordinary actions is really to ask, have you done the ordinary things correctly? And that is where I think the issues really are in the power sector. But as was said previously by AO, the issues that existed before COVID were proven problematic. And what COVID has done has, as it were, smashed any pretense we may have that we could perhaps go on managing the way we did. The main essence to this is that we've created a situation through actions and inactions where the financing of the power sector has essentially been nationalized, but the management and ownership is privatized. And we are not going to, and because of that, we are going to maintain this 4,000 megawatt market. The real question has to be, what market is it that we're planning for? And if we're planning for a larger market, then we have to figure out a way of proving to these investors, who may be pension funds, maybe banks, maybe others, that they are going to make money. Those issues existed before COVID. Those issues are more apparent now after COVID because the government's resources post-COVID are significantly smaller. So I've been on many committees, and the general view is that, oh, we have to keep on doing what we've been doing or implement what we said we were going to do. I think that what COVID has done is this will now force us to actually take much more experimental responses. I think that the 2019 strategies that we were looking at need to be, how can I put it politically, need to be definitely more experimental. We have to experiment a lot more, try things that work on a smaller scale, and see if those work to try to promote them. So, yes, this is very extraordinary. No one's heard of COVID, but the problems we have always existed. And I go back to what I always say. The generators, who are the bane of our lives, have never once come to the CBN and asked for concessionary interest rates or concessionary currencies. But they have managed to create a market far in excess of the capacity, 4,000 megawatts. If we want to grow our market beyond 4,000 megawatts, then we have to design a market that people can invest in. And it really is just as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. That was very useful. Finance is nationalized, ownership is privatized. How do we prove to investors that it will make money? And how do we try new things? What do we do to design a market that works? Thank you very much. I'd like to let our distinguished participants know that we have a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to type the questions to the panelists. I'll be very terse and tasted, straight to the point, so we can direct them at the right panelist. Thank you very much. So I'm going back to Mrs. Oshibodu. Thank you very much for your remarks. Considering all of this pandemic, you've mentioned technology as one of the things that will help us so far in reshaping the landscape going forward. What has been your experience deploying technology with distribution? And how do you think every player in the sector will be able to apply technology, considering the challenges you're having from a financing standpoint?
Thank you. I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay. I would think first, let me say that even with all the COVID and its challenges, it's been quite an interesting thing, because like everybody has said here, we all have been forced to wake up and say it's not business as usual. How do you do it? How do you change what you're doing? And how do you use technology? So for us, for example, using one example that is using, we already, from a payment perspective, had a situation where close to 90% of our collection was through what we call contactless channel. Closest to a contact channel, US neighborhood US events. That event for customers any time of the day. And only about 10% of our business was through our own internal cash offices. So one of the first things we did was to close down those places. And we've seen customers move more to online business, which before wasn't as the major one. Companies and even individual customers transacting their own payments online. So technology is working there. The other side that we've seen quite interesting, like I mentioned, finding ways to be in contact with the customer without physical contact. And because we're already working on various technologies to improve our billing process, we had to fast forward to basically launch some of this. So like I said, today you can sit in your house, you have a postpaid meter, and actually once we deploy the app to you and actually read the meter for us, send it live. Still, it improves cost, it improves flexibility, it reduces cost. Before, you never know whether the staff is throwing away the bills or distributing the bills. Today, we have applications that you will know whether you are in front of the place you are supposed to or not. Having enumerated the system, you know the coordinates, the application to your house, and see it from the office that you got there. So bill distribution, things that on the commercial side make it more easier for the customer to be comfortable with what you say you are doing. COVID is forcing us to fast forward those experiments that we probably wouldn't have finished for another 6 months. But having said that, we are also seeing from the metering perspective, those who have keyed into MAP, because the MAP application that we have, that is metering through this third-party providers, has reduced the ability to bypass and circumvent. We've seen customers managing their energy better. Typically, when you have prepaid meters and you see the energy running and you know what you are paying, you are spending money on not waiting for 1 month to manage the energy better. And typically, their cost reduces by 15 to 20%. So we are seeing some transformation from that side. And through those transformations are part of what will make bankability easier. On the other side, that is on the real business side now, that is supplying power much more effectively. Dedicated lines, willing buyer, willing seller concept, embedded generation, like on our own side, there are quite a number of parties that we're going to embed with us within the next 1 year. Makes it easier to move beyond just the 4,000 and move to a larger amount. But the most important is the cost of power and letting go of the cost of power to make sure that it works. Without the cost working right, investors will come in. So those are the things we see. Some excitement there.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Oshibodu. Very, very insightful thoughts there. We appreciate your comments. I'm moving over to Dr. George Oluwande. When you think about your experience as a private sector participant and now consultant, what needs to be done post-COVID-19 for power sector participants to reinvent themselves for the future of power supply, considering some of the things that Mrs. Oshibodu has already said?
Thank you. I think one of the things that is very clear is that Elliot said it, we need to accelerate the market in terms of what is required. From one point of view, I believe that there is going to be need for what I will call more bilateral engagement between distribution companies and generation companies outside of the embed structure. So what do I mean by this? It could be that we are going to have to envisage some sort of partnerships between the ISCO and GENCO, where they have excess power to sell and buy, so which will be more focused. I think Mrs. Yoshibodu mentioned direct lines, dedicated lines, so which will connect these two. There will have to be, to my mind, use of more automation, I think, and applications. Mrs. Yoshibodu again has identified some of these. And in one sense, I feel that there is need for more transparency. It's not a sexy term, if you pardon my English, but one of the things that in my time in the sector frustrates me is what I would call the sort of lack of sincerity and transparency across the value chain. Even though Ayo was talking about dismantling of PCN into sort of market operator, system operator, and all that, even before that, I think there is a need for better engagement between the PCN and, say, the discos in terms of what is delivered, where it's delivered, and how it is to be delivered to suit the end users. Same thing if you look at the gas suppliers. To my mind, the gas suppliers don't seem to engage well in the value chain. They never seem to think they are part of the power sector. They seem to be more focused on the oil and gas, and that in itself is inimical to progress. So I think for me, there's going to be need for better tie-ups or relationships or bilateral partnerships between DISCOs and GENCOs, not necessarily the big GENCOs. For instance, even DISCOs can build power plants. I don't see why that can't happen. Build power plants to meet their needs. It can be done. If they can find the money, if they can make the business case, I'm sure they can do it. And
very much, Dr. George. Really appreciate your thoughts on that. Find bilateral relationships and continue to have engagement across the value chain. I'm going on to Mr. Ayo Eko. Considering one of the challenges of the distribution companies is the fact that there continues to be power theft, a lot of issues with regulation as well. So what do you think in terms of post-COVID-19? How can we develop regulations and enforcement schemes that can help to curb the issues of power theft, maybe permanently? What do you think?
Sorry, I started speaking for a few seconds before I realized I was still on mute. Power theft is not a COVID-induced question. It's been there all the time. So I wouldn't say that it's something that we need to deal with because COVID has brought it about. We do need to deal with it, but I think it's a question of governance. One of the things that I believe needs to happen in the industry is decentralization. The power sector over the last 20 years, since the power policy was enacted in 2001, has been largely driven, in fact, almost entirely driven, as it were, top down from Abuja. However, we Nigerians, we customers, we don't live in Abuja, we live in states. And so the time, I believe, has now come for our states to get involved in how the power sector is run. And it's not in the patronage sense that one speaks about this. It's in the sense that the distribution companies, in order for them, again, bearing in mind that the competition of the discos is not each other, definitely not in terms of structure, in terms of law. Their primary competition, indeed, of the entire sector are the alternative power producers. right? And at the moment, that market is, I don't know how many times, 4, 5, 6 times larger than the daily 4,000 megawatt market that we have today. So if you want to, take more of the market that's already available to you, you have to decentralize. And in order to do that, you need to work with the state in which you are situated. Now, think of a situation where if a state government, for instance, says that you will not be issued a tax clearance certificate until you show that you have an electricity account. All right. If you have a certificate of occupancy issued by the state government, it ought to go along, if that property is developed and they know whether the property is developed or not, it ought to go along with having an account. Then, of course, management of things like collections becomes a little bit easier. The states are actually, particularly in a place like the FCT, major contributors to the regulated asset base of the distribution companies. And therefore, there's already a case legally, it's not just one about politics or morality here. There's a legal case for every single state in this federation to have equity in the distribution companies out of the part that is still being retained by the federal government. I think that conversation needs to be accelerated, needs to be done. And in that is a mechanism that the distribution companies can deploy to manage their collection issues. Now, until, and this is going back to what Dipere had said, until the discos can show that they are commercial, there will be no finance. It's that simple. And if before now we had depended on, and you put it in a way that I hadn't thought about it before, our financing is essentially nationalized, even though ownership is privatized. It makes no sense. So until you can show that you are commercial, you are not going to get finance from the government because there's no more money for the government to give to anybody. It's just not there. Oil is depleted. I mean, all revenues are depleted. And so that already takes away something like 60% of our revenues at federal and state level. And so you must put on your thinking caps about what to do. I think that there are one or two policy levers that can be pushed by NERC around recapitalization. And one of those is to get the states, the banks, who have lent to a lot of these core investors, all right, and the generating companies involved in what happens at the discos in terms of capitalization. We're already seeing that there are one or two generating companies that are active in the distribution sector through a holding company structure. You've got Sahara. You're seeing one or two others doing transactions, and in the coming months, if not already happened, 3 or 4 discos will now have significant involvement of the generating company. I think we need to look at that a little bit more because no one has an incentive greater than a generating company to ensure that when energy goes in one direction, money comes back in the other. All right. So
Yes.
another is, and George had alluded to this point when he talked about the gas market. There has never been a situation in which, even though we're dependent for about 80% of our energy on gas-fired generation, we had really worked hard to get the gas market involved. And there was a bit of disdain also from them because we're essentially owing them. We never really paid up our bills. So they wouldn't look at us as serious people. But now the oil market is receding, prices are going down, and we have to look a little bit more closely at the gas market for 2 reasons. First, the gas that we use in our market is associated gas. So we need to ask ourselves, if we're going to have a depressed oil market, how are we going to ensure the security of our gas supplies? All right, that's one. Second, in terms of pricing, we owe the gas market and we need to begin to think of ways of paying them. I think that NEC can do something about this. And one way might be to get all of us that are involved in generation, and I'm not just talking about the GENCOs that are part of the electricity market, but the alternative power market also. There's no reason, I think, today why we shouldn't be looking for the levers that NEC can push to ensure that everything that generates that has a capacity above, take a figure for now, let's take 150 kVA, is gas-fired. If you say that you want to see everything above 150 kVA being gas-fired within the next 12 months, you have immediately kicked off a huge boom in construction. Construction for gas production and supply, because we are now talking about going well beyond the something like 800 to 900, 750 to 800 million scoff per day that goes into the Gencos. You now need to look for another maybe 1.2, 1.5, 2 billion scoff for the alternative power market, right? You're kicking off a construction boom there. So you're actually dealing with some of your COVID-related socioeconomic issues because now you must look for people to work in construction. You're also looking at kicking off funding into gas transmission, whether it's a virtual pipeline or an actual pipeline that needs to be built. You're also looking at ultimate supply to the infrastructure for supplying the alternative power market. So I think NERC also needs to begin to think out of the box. NERC is going to have to be a key driver in how we make sure the market survives. And if you deal with that, you're able to get more gas into this market, then you're also helping Nigeria with its greenhouse gas emission climate change commitments, which means you catalyze more carbon neutral money coming into Nigeria. You're also ensuring that we have a true domestic gas supply market for the first time that actually has money coming and going across that market, which of course helps the generation and therefore the electricity, the public sector supply market itself. So
thank you very much, Mr. Ayo. I thank you very much for your contribution. I just want to make sure that we are able to proceed now, but I'm going to come back to you. You have to talk more about that framework that will make the gas market work some more. But going on now, I would like to talk to Mr. Ebikere Clark, just to get your thoughts. You know, you mentioned a couple of things in terms of making projects and the power sector bankable, such that are attractive to investors. So what are the things that you believe are critical to be able to make the current power sector value chain attractive to investment, either from pension funds or any other financier that you see out there, including the CBN? What are your thoughts?
Going back to what I said, I think we always tend to think there's some special solution. It's simple. Can you pay me back? The most easiest form of financing is a simple loan. And based upon that is one simple question: how am I going to get my money back? The power sector cannot answer that question at this current moment. So you can't use financial engineering to solve an economic problem. So someone will come along and say, give me this guarantee, give me this, do this sort of structure. If the economics, the simple numerical economics do not work, there's nothing you can do. So the economics have to work. That's the answer to that question.
Thank you very much, Mr. I just want to let our participants know that you please use the Q&A box. Make sure that you are asking questions. We'll be pulling them together and we'll be directing it to the relevant persons on our panel. Thank you very much. So the first question today is going to Mrs. Oshibodu. A couple of a question coming from one of our participants is asking that it appears that the perception of the public is that discos do not want to meet our customers because they are making money from estimated billing. What are your thoughts about that? That's a question asked from one of our participants.
I should go ahead and answer?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. That's a very important question in even answering what Ebikere mentioned earlier in terms of ability to set up. Mission, like I said earlier, is a major aspect about it. Mission gives the confidence for the customer to say that what is going on is fair price. And nobody wants to pay when he's not sure whether he's getting fair price. And pushing is the measurement. Unfortunately, with the third-party metering that was introduced by NEC and we all bought into it, customers, metering parties, quite some excitement that that aspect will create additional jobs because they are third parties. It was dead on arrival for a couple of reasons. One, The pricing that eventually came out through net was below cost for those parties. Nobody was doing buy high and sell low. That was the margin for what you call single phase. There was a small margin, but for three phase it was negative margin. To make matters worse, at around the same time they are taking on duty increased by 30%, so you wiped off everybody. So this little metering going on right now are those who have some meters on ground and they are using that. Once that goes off, the pricing doesn't work. Now, on our own side, as discos, we want this to happen. Why? Because it reduces the age-long issue about payment. When you use analytics to look at customers that are metered and customers that are not metered, the ratio of payment is like times 2 for those who are metered. So definitely discos want meter. But for real, there's a problem in terms of, again, I would say the way some of our policies work, where there isn't enough coordination and something that is meant to be interesting and good for the common good is almost dead on arrival by the time it takes off. Second thing that has been a major issue also are the customers that did speak of. For the meeting going on, you find the customers telling you, I don't have money. Meanwhile, the system that NEC has put in place means you can pay, you can spread it out even up to 10 years. But the customer looks for a way of saying, I don't have money, and come back tomorrow. And there isn't much you can do, even when you threaten disconnection. As you are living there, there's some electrician somewhere that will go and repair. So there's that ding-dong between the customer and the discos, and that continues to fuel this that it pays the discos to have estimated. It doesn't pay them. The numbers are very clear. So for me, that's why I mentioned earlier that it is so important for the government also to join in, because it's not just the discos to change the mindset. All of us need to change our mindset that this thing is not, and they must be paid for at the right price if you want bankability and if you want investors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oshigodu. Thank you very much. I want to direct this question to Ebipore Clark, and I'm going to take a cue from Mrs. Oshigodu saying that, customers need to pay. This question is from Abisola O as one of the participants. He's saying, can we address the impact of the 2 months free electricity palliative, which suggested to customers that consumption of electricity during this period shall not be paid for? This has further compounded the already precarious current state of discos. How would the federal government respond to that?
I'm not really sure what the question is. This was something that was put up by the National Assembly. So if the government wants to pay for power, it's all well and good saying what should happen, but what hasn't been described is how it will be affected. So I have a prepaid meter. I have to physically pay to get power. How does the government pay me back? So I'm a little bit confused with the question, because even though I understand that this is a palliative, it's very good in terms of relieving the stress on the common citizen, it's not clear how this would be affected. And if someone doesn't explain to me how something's going to be affected, it's as good as magic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Going on to Mr. Ayo, do you feel that the electricity industry is adequately regulated based on what you've said so far?
Okay, Jide, sorry. When you say adequately, you mean in terms of it? Well, there are two ways to look at it. The legal framework that has to be administered and the actual implementation of that framework itself. First, I think that we have a pretty good framework for regulating the power sector. More importantly, one that also enables all the players in the industry. And when I say players there, I don't mean just generation, transmission, distribution, but also gas supply. So even though you don't have the gas suppliers being directly regulated by the electricity regulator, there's a lot of scope for bringing them into the frame of discussion and setting up policy in the sector. So it's there, it works, it has worked in the past, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work in the future, provided we can tweak it from time to time. Really, our regulatory framework works through rules and regulations. So we bring me to the other point. How well have those rules and regulations been implemented? The answer, of course, is not well. Certainly not in the last 5 to 6 years. Many of us would tend to blame the Regulatory Commission. I wouldn't place all the responsibility for where things are on the regulator directly, because a lot of our rules are also indirect in the sense that they leave responsibility in the hands of certain players, one of which is the system and the market operator, to be able to play important roles in how this works. I think that what ought to have happened should have been that we should have had a regulatory commission that was on top of, first, drawing data from the industry to be able to take decisions in the right way at the right time, and secondly, being ready to drive performance and the right kind of behavior. We haven't really seen much of that. I think it's beginning to change, but it needs to happen a lot more quickly and a lot more thoroughly. So I would say, on one hand, in terms of actual legal framework, it's pretty good. On the other hand, in terms of executing or making that framework work, it hasn't been that good. And there's a lot of room for improvement, but I think we're beginning to see some of that happening now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ayo. Dr. George, there's a question here for you from Mr. Richard Oshowole. A lot of the power in Nigeria is generated from associated gas, and with exports down and all markets collapsing, with oil production down, what measures should be put in place to keep the gas flowing for power during COVID-19?
That's a tough question. What measures should be put in place? I think, interestingly, until Ayo pointed it out, I've not given this some thought, because majority of the gas supply in Nigeria is definitely associated, and if the crude stops, then the gas will stop. One of the things that in the past was being suggested by the likes of myself is that we probably need to start looking more at gas storage, because if during the height of the vandalization that we used to have, one of the things that we used to suffer was electricity production, because gas production stopped. And typically the repairs of those pipelines take about 3-4 days. So one thing that was at the time, I think I engaged with PwC some time back on this, was the possibility of saying, rather than have the gas interrupted, are there ways in which gas storage could be developed so that they act as a buffer during those sort of periods? In the case of where we are now, I think the key thing is going to be the incentivization, as Ayo suggested, for a real domestic gas market. Because it's the only way. I think the SA Power to the CBN, they mentioned it. If the economics work, things will happen. If people can see that this is a business where profit can be made, it will incentivize people to develop it. So I think that's really how best I can put it.
Thank you very much, Dr. George. There are a lot of questions coming in that relate to the FX challenges in the industry and what the stakeholders should contemplate going forward. And one of them is that with the increasing impact of Forex on operations and maintenance costs, what are the things that the CBN, for example, can do to sort of ameliorate such issues? How would you respond, Mr. Park?
Okay. Yeah, what can the CBN do to ameliorate this? FX policy is for the entire economy, okay? And the FX market, like the energy market, is regulated. So what I normally say to people in the power sector is they have to size up what is required. Once you can size up what is required, it's then possible, well, no, it's then easy to create, if it's required, some sort of intervention to remedy that. Now, like I said, this has to compete with other sectors of the economy. So it's up really to the power sector to determine what they see as important in terms of foreign capital, what that size is, and how they would be able to rank that, going from, say, importing a turbine, importing a meter, or paying for some management contractor. There needs to be a definition of this, because in a similar way to energy availability, we can't, no one can say at this current moment, I need 24/7 power. But if you can define a particular area and you can treat that separate to the whole, it will be possible to get a solution.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Clark, for that comment. We're getting out of time, so I would like to just take one more question and direct that to Mrs. Oshibodu. There has been a lot of talk about franchising the network, the discos, and the opportunities for a lot of deregulation in meter supply. What would you think is the forward approach towards franchising, and how open are the discos to that sort of approach going forward?
Thank you very much. Franchising is one of the things that generally find exciting. In fact, some level of franchising is already, especially at where, remember, Netflix some exposure draft on 3 types of franchising. First level, where the communities are the that take over their electricity, what they call electricity community. It's already happening with quite a number of our own networks. We have a loss of community, 1,500. I would say that is maybe already self-governed, which is the first level of franchising. Then that decentralization is important because it creates more of a great participation. But everything actually boils advertising, and people will be interested in moving in. They know that you can recover their costs, and that's why for me this new proposal from NEC about activating differentiated energy consumption tariffs based on service and KPIs is an exciting one, because then the person that is living in a big mansion should not be paying the same and consuming energy day and night, not be paying the same tariff as somebody who is in a one room apartment whose energy is big. Similarly, the energy you consume daytime, where there's a lot of competition, the price should not be the same as the energy nighttime when there isn't much consumption. So we are now moving towards an environment that can centralize pricing, unlike before. And with decentralized pricing, it then means that various alternatives in franchising can be pursued. Various alternatives in power generation can be pursued. And the convergence that people was mentioning earlier can then be easier to achieve. So franchising definitely is not a future, it's even here now. It's just that part of it is being considered before now because of price.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Shibo. Really appreciate. I have two questions that I'm going to direct at Dr. George and Ebipere, and I want you to quickly answer in the next 30 seconds or so. What do you feel is the pathway for renewables in Nigeria? One of our attendees, so that you could ask that question. What's the future for renewables for you, Dr. George? And Ebipere, will the federal government at any point in time consider subsidy?
Hello. For me, renewables has to be part of the mix. There is no doubt about that. But the reality is that, like everything we are talking about, it has to make commercial sense. That's all. If it commercially makes sense, then no problem. But definitely, it has to be part of the energy mix portfolio. Thanks.
To you, Ebipere.
I don't know what you mean by the. Okay, federal government consider subsidy. From the presentation, there was a word that said electricity subsidy. So the whole question is, will it consider it as policy? Now, for that, you've probably got to ask the Ministry of Power. But I would say effectively there must be some subsidy going on, as that presentation pointed out, because the price I pay a Buja Disco is less than the price a Buja Disco pays for power. So the only question we're looking at is how this gap gets resolved and who's responsible for it. Now, if the federal government says that they will take responsibility for it, then it's a policy statement. But at the moment now, would the federal government consider policy? Someone's paying for the subsidy.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome all our panelists to make one final closing remarks. I want you to make it in quickly in 30 seconds, starting with Mrs. Funke Oshibodu.
Thank you. My own closing remark is that convergence of the various types of methodology, both of regulations are already in place to create the convergence pricing liberalization important and less intervention. So there is a need for a coordinated and aligned policy and environment with all stakeholders. Very important for the customers. Be ready to reduce your wastage so as to reduce cost of power while market participants ready to pay and use. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oshibodu. Dr. George.
Something that's not been discussed before, but which I think has to be very important, is transnationality of the power. What do I mean by this? It is clear to me that we need to be able to have interconnection to neighboring countries in terms of electricity, either to be able to sell to them or to be able to buy from them. Because going forward, I don't think any country, especially in sub-Sahara, can rely just on itself. And especially back to the renewables, where you saw, say, the Sahara Desert is probably a good place for large-scale renewables that can go across many nations and that can feed many nations. So I think there is a need to also look at transnational operations in terms of generation and transmission.
Thank you very much, Dr. George. Mr. Ayo.
Yeah, thank you. Closing remarks. I think the bottom line is the energy sector needs to recognize that now more than ever, it must become an enabler for the economy. We shouldn't be self-absorbed. We need to look outside and realize that we need to support the economy to grow. That essentially means growing the volume that the market sells or trades on a daily basis. We need to take more from the alternative power market and bring it into that market. There are 3 or 4 levers that I think need to be pulled. One of them is around the rules that govern our market. We don't have rules. We need to ensure that we go back to rules, very clear rules that we commit to and we observe. Secondly, we need to recapitalize. And doing that involves bringing the states into the frame of discussion as supporters at distribution and at generation level within the market. We need to talk to the generating companies themselves as being participants in the market because they have the greatest incentive of all to make sure that energy goes out and money comes back. Thirdly, we need to look at our governance, both public sector, private sector. NERC needs to play a much more active, much more decisive, a much firmer role in ensuring that we behave in the right way, because at the end of the day, it's all about how we behave. Just like with COVID, our behavior now is critical. And we need to make sure also that now more than ever, the gas business is much more closely integrated with the electricity business. Oil is less of a factor. Gas is definitely going to be a much bigger factor. So our associated gas wells, our younger oil wells, which can have more gas coming out of them, we'll need to make sure that they come more into play. And if we're able to grow that domestic gas market, grow the volumes, generate more cash, enable other sectors of the economy, then maybe we can manage better the macroeconomic factors that actually we cannot control in terms of how they affect our tariffs. So if I have to speak in 30 seconds, I would say that we just need to make sure that we have a much more decentralized but also much more joined up sector. At the same time, you can understand that contradiction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayo. Adikwe.
Okay, final wrap up. Markets are relatively simple when you think about it. But we've managed to arrive at a point where we've designed a system that can't supply a service to the rich, yet we expect it to supply the same service to the poor. There isn't a single market in the world that works like that. Part of this is because of what's been mentioned a lot, this centralization, this prescription of how the market should behave without perhaps looking down at what the local participants themselves are willing or ready to take up. So if we're to solve this, and like I said, the ability to fund this from national resources has dropped. It's dropped. So we have to be more experimental. And for that, as with all markets, from pork bellies to crude, we need to design those incentives to be better, and we need to improve transparency. We need to understand that this is a market. It's not a social service. It can evolve to that if the market develops, but it's a market, and the economics need to work. And pretending that we can get by without them working has now ended.
Oh, wow. On that note, I want you to join me in thanking our panelists today. Mrs. Funke Oshibodu, CEO, Benin Electricity Distribution Company, Dr. George Oluwande, Managing Consultant, Abisol Consultants, Mr. Ayo Ekpo, Director, New Frontiers Development Limited, Mr. Ebipere Clark, SA to the CBN Governor on Power. We also like to thank Mr. Ahmed Zakari. He had to drop off at some point during the call. He had to attend to an urgent matter at the Office of the Presidency. So on this basis, I would like every one of our distinguished participants to please join me in thanking all our panelists for this very, very insightful session today. We look forward to more from that. On this note, I would like to hand over to one of my colleagues, Mrs. Temitope Yusuf, to give the vote of thanks, and we close from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jide. You will agree with me that esteemed panelists have done justice to the topic, impact of COVID-19 on the power industry, with a particular focus on the macroeconomics of Nigeria and its impact on consumer purchasing power and cost-reflective tariffs. At PwC, our purpose is to build trust in society and solve important problems.
there is no time more ripe with problems than right now. However, as wise men say, the ultimate measure of a man, and we dare say an organization as well, is not where they stand in moments of comfort, but rather where they stand at times of challenges. The current situation is full of challenges, even more so for the power industry. But it also comes with great opportunities. I must say that having been on this call today, there's so many possibilities as to how those opportunities could be tapped into that even I personally had not thought about before. So if you permit me, I would briefly reinstate my key takeaways from this webinar, as well as the survey we administered upon registration by participants to this webinar. And we had over 500 participants. Over half of our respondents believe that the impact of COVID-19 pandemic will be felt beyond a year, and that the major concerns for the power industry will be the reduced consumer purchasing power and inability of government to continue to bail out the industry. Participants believe that the following dynamic changes will happen in the sector: that the cost-reflective tariff models may change, that there may be an increased focus on metering and collection, and that there will be an increased focus on renewable power alternatives. Participants also believe that the top responses within the industry will be to improve operational efficiency and optimize the use of technology. Some takeaways from the panel session for me was that there were issues in this industry pre-COVID, and COVID has only served to elevate the issues. However, what this does is there's a need for more experimental responses within the industry. There needs to be more innovation in the way that you're thinking about how to respond to the challenges that the industry currently faces. Business models need to adapt to the new realities, and I got a lot of that from Mrs. Oshibodu. In terms of the use of technology, the use of e-platforms, and generally just the way things work in the industry need to adapt to new realities, and business models need to be more resilient. There needs to be an increased focus or shift, more like from the current 4,000 megawatt market to the larger alternative power market. There needs to be more increased collaboration or symbiosis within the players in the electricity market to deliver appropriately to the customers, bearing in mind that the target customers have different needs. There needs to be market participants need to be commercial, particularly the distribution companies, to be able to attract investors into the power sector. And there needs to be improved governance structures of all market participants in the industry. So for me, those were the key takeaways from the session. On that note, we would like to express our immense gratitude to the panelists for sharing their wealth of experience, for heeding our call whenever we make them, for being great friends of the house. Thank you very much. In no particular order, Mrs. Funke Oshibodu, CEO, Bini Electricity Distribution Company, thank you very much. Dr. George Oluwande, Managing Consultant, Abyssal Consultants, thank you. Mr. Eyo Ekpo, Director, New Frontiers Development Limited, we thank you so much. Mr. Edipere Clark, Special Advisor on Power to the CBN Governor, we sincerely appreciate you all. And to the participants who created time to be here and listen to our panelists on this all-important topic and sector, we say thank you and encourage you to join our future webinars organized by PwC. We take our thought leadership and knowledge sharing initiatives quite seriously. And as a result, we will be having several webinars, not necessarily only relating to COVID, but across different sectors and industries. On a final note, please remember that PwC is here to support you to thrive and ultimately bloom through these trying times. Thank you, Adriento. See you soon. Thank you.